I'm Bable Jonathan, and this is the 6 p.m. primetime newscast on Équinoxe Television, live from our headquarters in Cameroon's economic capital. Dwelling our top stories in this edition of the news: independent or international human rights organization Human Rights Watch condemns the use of civilians in the fight against Boko Haram terrorists in the far north region of the Republic of Cameroon. According to a report published by the organization, soldiers are forcing civilians to fight at the front line against Boko Haram, and the civilians are not armed, not trained, and not paid by soldiers. We'll have details in this edition of the news. We'll also talk about the World Health Organization, which is warning that the coronavirus pandemic is now increasing at an alarming rate, and the organization has appointed an independent panel to give what it qualifies as an honest evaluation of the global response to the pandemic. Thanks once more for joining us in this edition of the news. Some of the detainees of the Anglophone crisis being held in detention centers in the nation's political capital, Yaoundé, have expressed their support to their leaders within the framework of efforts to restore normalcy and peace in the two Anglophone regions of the Republic of Cameroon, hit by a socio-political and security crisis for close to 4 years today. In a statement, the detained Anglophones expressed their support, indicating that they are backing or they are in support of the preconditions issued by their leaders, notably Sisiku Ayuktabe and the others. And among the preconditions for peaceful negotiation and a way out of the Anglophone crisis are the demilitarization of the two Anglophone regions of the Republic of Cameroon. The statement indicates or says that the soldiers should return to their barracks, and of course the unconditional release of all arrested and detained in connection to the Anglophone crisis, and the granting of general amnesty to all detainees of the Anglophone crisis and refugees, Anglophone refugees who are out of the country, and of course the setting up of a framework for negotiations to begin in the presence of a third party. Human Rights Watch is accusing soldiers in Cameroon for forcing civilians to fight at the front line against Boko Haram terrorists in the far north region of the country. The Human Rights Organization says in a report that the civilians who are forced to fight against Boko Haram are not trained, are not armed, and not paid by the soldiers. For me, I'm Strong Sanda.
In what the international rights group says amounts to forced labor, Human Rights Watch accused Cameroonian soldiers of forcing civilians to perform local night guard duty to protect against attacks by armed Islamist militant group Boko Haram. Louis Modgi, Central Africa Director for Human Rights Watch, asked that Cameroonian authorities should immediately stop forcing civilians to perform night guard duty and instead protect civilians through lawful means. The civilians who were reportedly forced under threat to perform guard duty received no compensation, were put in harm's way. The civilians, Human Rights Watch added, were not trained, left unarmed, and were told to run back to the town to alert the army if they saw Boko Haram fighters approaching. The right group cites victims, witnesses, and residents saying that at least 40 people were threatened with death and beatings or were beaten for refusing to take part in the activity. Louis Modgi further demand Cameroonian authorities to investigate the reported beatings, threats, and forced labor, as well as bringing to book members of the national security forces found to be responsible. reminding the government that Cameroon has ratified both international covenants on civil and political rights and the 1930 International Labour Organization Forced Labour Convention number 29, which prohibit the use of forced or compulsory labor. Human Rights Watch stated that trust between the forces of law and order and the population has to be reconstructed. The International Rights Group said these abuses were recorded between the month of March and the end of April in the locality of Mozogo in the Far North region of the Republic of Cameroon. In the report published July 10, 2020, Human Rights Watch accused the soldiers of the 42nd Motorized Infantry Battalion of having forced civilians to mount night watches as a means of preventing surprise attacks from Islamist militant group Boko Haram in that locality of the war-ravaged Far North region. The report also indicated that Human Rights Watch interviewed 12 witnesses residing in Mozogo who were not subjected to this forced labor by the same elements of the 42nd Motorized Infantry Battalion and 4 representatives of the local human rights organization. According to Human Rights Watch, Boko Haram militants have carried out over 200 attacks and raids in the Far North region, killing at least 126 people since January 2020.
And the crisis that has been pulling on for close to 4 years in the northwest and southwest regions of the country has provoked a significant adverse impact on custom revenue in the 2 Anglophone regions of the country. David Maimo reports that the new officials of the custom department in the southwest region have been urged to work hard to remedy the situation.
Some financial experts say, due to the ongoing Anglophone crisis for close to 4 years, financial contribution to the state coffers from the northwest and southwest regions respectively has drastically declined.
At this critical time in the life of our country, the government needs all the resources to be able to continue to assure state functions in the midst of all the crises that we are going through, especially with the coronavirus pandemic.
The Southwest Customs sector, which was among the top of the state-generating income source, is barely surviving, with some custom posts shut down, others working below capacity. The new Southwest Chief of Customs definitely has a huge task that lies ahead of him, reason why the Inspector General at the Southwest Governor's Office, speaking during the installation, pledged the support of the administration to the Southwest Customs, especially in the domain of security. The Inspector General called on all custom personnel to provide the necessary support for the new boss to succeed in his mission. He equally said the new custom boss must collaborate with business persons and the population if he must succeed.
Nobody works in isolation. He should just do everything within his powers, that in case of any obstacle or anything that he may encounter, he should keep us informed, because the administration has power over the use of force and not the chief of sector.
Daniel Yamsi say he is aware of the challenges and the present socio-political situation in the southwest region.
Nous savons tous que le sud-ouest n'est pas épargné par la crise que nous connaissons, la crise sociale que nous connaissons. Mais bien évidemment, avant d'arriver ici, avant de prendre mes fonctions tout à l'heure, j'ai tenu à avoir la bénédiction de monsieur le gouverneur de la région.
On his part, the representative of the Director General of Customs reminded the new Southwest Custom Boss of his mission before calling on all custom personnel to be very vigilant of contraband goods entering the country. The new Southwest Custom Boss takes over from Etabe Ewanga, promoted as technical advisor in the Ministry of Finance.
Davidson Memo reporting there from Limbe. The transportation and sale of illegal fuel remains a hard nut, just too difficult to crack for administrative authorities in the town of Bamenda, northwest region of the Republic of Cameroon. The different administrative authorities who have been appointed in those regions, senior divisional officers have struggled to put an end to that activity to no avail. And once more, the divisional officer of the Bamenda 2 subdivision has been urged to step up the fight against the illegal transportation or sale of fuel in the town of Bamenda. Bustela reports.
The illegal sale of fuel by the roadside is gaining ground within and without Bamenda as many fuel stations are shutting down. In Bamenda 2 subdivision, this fuel is sold in containers ranging from 1 to 5 liters and the prices vary between 500 to 800 francs per liter. Successive administrators have fought without success at ending the transportation and sale of this fuel commonly called Fingi or Zwazwa. Though with devastating consequences in case of an accident, more people are indulging in the business.
Here is your divisional officer. Mr. Nicolas Combo Manson. Take command.
The incoming divisional officer for Bamenda 2 will have to continue from where others have ended, but this will not be the only fire on his table.
We equally see in you an ambassador very ready to face the challenges of our subdivision, notably insecurity, increase in crime waves, fight against spread of COVID, land dispute, inertia in public offices, and the council development drive for the general good of the population of Bamenda municipality.
Nicolas Kongo has taken over from Tanyi Roxinwe Ako and is expected to work in the interest of the population of the Bamenda 2 subdivision.
Despite the huge electric energy potential of the Republic of Cameroon, electricity remains a scarce commodity, so to speak, in many parts of the country, from the big cities into the hinterlands. A recurrent power failure is making life quite difficult for several inhabitants. And in this edition of the news, we are taking you to Menua in the west region of the country, where the people are lamenting over this problem and calling on authorities to take adequate measures for adequate or good electric energy supply within their communities.
Just like several other localities in the country, the inhabitants of Menua division in the west region live in darkness. Even the senior divisional officer uses a lantern when lights are off. It's a disgrace to us. We are 100 years backward. We have refused to grow.
On n'a pas évolué. On a refusé d'évoluer.
Inhabitants of the Menua witness electricity cut at least 10 times a day, which impacts negatively on those who are in need of it constantly. The absence leads to the destruction of electronics alongside the loss of perishable goods. Every second lights are off, they will see they are coming to arrange it. School-going children and medical practitioners are all affected by the numerous cuts in power supply. The power unit that usually supply electricity in the absence of the company in charge of the supply of electricity has been abandoned. When the power unit was available, we had light every day and didn't face any problem. We were served with electricity supply day and night. Water was used to generate the energy that was natural. We need not put fuel for it to supply us energy. The newly elected officials of Nchang municipality are now reassuring the population that electricity supply will be reinstalled. According to the mayor of Chang, Jacques Kemle, about 1 billion francs CFA has been allocated for the said project to generate electricity for the population of the Menua in the west region.
Littoral Governor Samuel Dedone Vahadipoa has urged administrators of his area of command, senior divisional officers, and mayors, as well as other administrative officials, to work hard to step up the respect of anti-COVID-19 measures within their areas of command. He was speaking today during visit to some of the COVID-19 testing centers in the town of Douala. Immaculate Foge reports.
In the streets of Douala, markets and other public spaces, many dwellers are still seen going about their daily activities without their face mask. Many of them do not respect the compulsory face mask wearing and other anti-COVID-19 measures in the town classified as the second epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic in Cameroon. Governor Samuel Juduneva Dibua denounces the non-respect of the wearing of face masks by some persons, calling on local administrators to get to work.
People are not wearing their masks, and we are asking all the digital officers, the mayors, to make an effort to go back to those places to ask.
Committed in keeping its citizens of the Littoral region informed on government's effort to mitigate the spread of the coronavirus, takes direct action against the public health emergency as he forms a task force to coordinate the response plan in Douala. He went ahead by visiting some COVID-19 testing centers in order to get first-hand information on what is happening on the field. When a patient is tested positive, the next action taken is asking them to go get themselves quarantined in COVID-19 treatment centers. But some of our patients refuse to go get themselves treated in these centers, so we ask them to self-quarantine at home. We call them daily so they can tell us if they are feeling much better. For those who are tested negative, we urge them to continue respecting COVID-19 barrier measures. The governor, during his tour, applauds the prompt reaction of some persons showing symptoms related to COVID-19 who decide to go get themselves tested without waiting to be in a critical condition before doing so. He says such a mindset makes the fight against the coronavirus easy. Over 60,000 persons have been tested for COVID-19 in Douala. The population are called upon to continue respecting all government's anti-COVID-19 measures.
The World Health Organization warns that the coronavirus is now spreading at an accelerated rate. The organization says institutions need to review their approach if they hope to contain the virus. It has appointed an independent panel to give what it calls an honest assessment of the global response to the pandemic. That's Euronews.
The World Health Organization has announced it's setting up an independent panel to review its handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and the response by governments. It comes off the back of a resolution passed by the organization's member states in May to evaluate the leadership of the WHO and the role of the UN system in coordinating the global response.
This is a time for self-reflection, to look at the world we live in and to find ways to strengthen our collaboration as we work together to save lives and bring this pandemic under control.
Former New Zealand Prime Minister Helen Clark and former Liberian President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf have agreed to head the panel and choose its members. An interim report will be made in November and a full one in May.
A challenging assignment.
The Trump administration has been particularly critical of the World Health Organization's response to the pandemic, with President Donald Trump pulling US funding from the organization in April. On Monday, it also formally notified the UN of its withdrawal from the organization.
And some experts think that the creation of the independent panel is a strong signal of a change in the fight against the pandemic. Take a listen to Professor Ilona Kikbash.
Well, I think this panel is going to play a very, very important role. It gives a very strong signal that this is not just about health. As you know, a lot of the criticism has been that WHO got caught up in a geopolitical tiff between the United States and China. And I think it's a big signal to now see that the heads of this panel are former heads of state and government. And that also one of them, as you know, is a Nobel Prize winner. People that one can trust, that will truly give an independent assessment of what has happened, and that won't only look at the WHO, but will also look how leaders in in countries have responded.
Talking Point is up next. Thanks for staying with us in Talking Points. We're receiving a politician, a political analyst, a member of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement, CRM, political party, who is joining us in this edition of the news, and we're going to be discussing about the Anglophone crisis and of course the report of Human Rights Watch and the use of civilians in the fight against Boko Haram in the far north region of the Republic of Cameroon. Tayon Elvis, you're welcome.
Well, I think thanks very much. It's my pleasure making present here after a pretty long time, and I think that after everything, we have to always put in place modest contributions to get things moving the way they're supposed to be.
All right, detainees of the Anglophone crisis expressed their support to their leaders with regards to some preconditions that must be in place for a move towards the way out of the current situation in the northwest and southwest regions of the country to start. First, demilitarization of the two Anglophone regions of the country. The military should return to their barracks.
Well, I think the points are on course. You know, the issue of demilitarization has always been a problem when we tend to analyze on platforms of this nature, because some people tend to misinterpret and think that we mean that the entire military, police corps, everything should return, should leave the area. No. We'll talk about demilitarization. It simply means that the areas where they usually occur, they need to get back to base. And of course, you know, we'll talk about getting back to base means that because, you know, we have numerous military camps that have been opened day in, day out to curb the situation of insecurity. So we think that in the case where they have to get back to base, it simply means that if they were in Ekona and the other areas, they could now retreat probably back to the 21st Infantry Battalion in Buya, or they could retreat down to their main camp up station in Bamenda, and at the end of it, you discover that the coordination activities on the ground in terms of the peace process would be much more better. But then you cannot arrive at that particular aspect when you have not been able to engage into meaningful dialogues, because the government cannot carry out withdrawal of the troops on the ground back to base when there hasn't been any preliminary fruitful, I repeat, preliminary fruitful discussions with the actors that be. And so at the end of it, Babila, you know, we keep saying that the end result of this issue is that the government and the separatist fighters are the main actors. You know, we have been getting a lot of confusion these days whereby some people think that stakeholders should come in, so many. No, these are the main actors, and of course we need to give peace a chance. They are the ones to sit on. Anybody who wants to sit there should come after. Of course, we now have political parties that have a role to play, and organizations that have a role to play. They too have to be given a chance when that time comes. But at the main point where we are, the principal actors need to take the lead for this conflict to be resolved.
The soldiers have to return to their barracks, but the government says that the soldiers are there to protect the population, and if they have to return to their barracks, that would be equal to abandoning the population in the hands of separatist fighters who are referred to as terrorists today. Colonel Atonfak, spokesperson or head of the communication department of the Ministry of Defense, says that the military is there striving to restore peace. So they cannot be restoring peace and at the same time returning to their barracks. How to reconcile that?
Well, I think the communication officer for MINDEF, that's the Minister of Defense, surely is missing a particular point. Now, if you look at what I just analyzed a few minutes ago, I was saying that when you return to barracks, there are preliminary talks that must be engaged between you, the state, and the separatist fighters. Now, when you get to this kind of talk, the next thing is you'll be talking with the separatists. If you want us to get back to the barracks, what assurance do you give us to ensure the security of the populations on the ground? You know, when you come to an agreement within these two factions, you discover that even when the military returns to barracks, the separatist fighters themselves, who also have arms, can now take the security of the people. But now it goes on the ground, on the platform of good faith. And therefore, when we look at it critically, that's why I said most of the times the state...
The government thinks that they are not there to ensure the security of the people, but they are there to terrorize the people and so on. And so, how can... The question is how to return to the barracks and restore peace at the same time, and be restoring peace and be protecting the people while in the barracks.
Well, you know, when you look at some of the steps of conflict resolution, Babila, you understand that the moment you engage this fruitful discussion with another party, they are in stages. The first stage, if it's in a complex war where you have prisoners on both sides, you have what called prisoner swap. Now, in this case, we don't have that. So what do? If you talk with the separatist fighters, for example, I'm talking about the leaders, not the separatist fighters, because the government has been making an error by thinking that you could bypass the separatist leaders to go and talk with the separatist fighters in the bush. It becomes, most of the times I say, very difficult, because it is difficult for you to control somebody whom you did not give him gun, but you could pass through the person who gave him gun or the person who's sponsoring him to talk to him, and you'll be able to go through. So in this case, the return to the barracks is simple, Mr. Babila, in that once a fruitful discussion begins on the ground, stage one, what do? Both parties agree on it. If we both agree on a ceasefire, it means that there will be terms put in place. If I am the military and I'm taking my troops back to the barracks, what do you do with the vulnerable population? The separatist fighter will give you a guarantee, because all moves with mutual trust. But in a case where mutual trust is absent, it becomes complex. And that's why I said, and I'll say it several times, that the level at which the conflict has gone on for 4 years and above, it is true, the state has an upper hand to take leads in restoring peace and for the separatist fighters to follow. But because of a rupture, what we call breach of trust between the separatist fighters and the government, it explains why the government can soften the ground, but a third party, I repeat, a third party accepted by both parties is required to push the peace process as fast as possible.
Now, another point on the statement of the separatists who are being detained, or the Anglophones who are being detained, is about the unconditional release of all those who have been arrested and are being detained in connection to the crisis. Is this anything? Is this something that can come anytime soon? These calls have been rising to the sky for quite a long time now, and some of them have been released. However, for 2 or 3 times, the President of the Republic has decided to release some of them.
Well, that statement depends on how the state looks at it and the level at which the state takes to analyze that kind of statement. Now, if you look at the conflict in South Sudan, you realize that both parties, both the president and his vice president, at a point in time when they had the preliminary talks in Democratic Republic of Congo, they arrived at the point of releasing of prisoners, which was effective. And so, when you talk about peace process, there could be conditions under which the prisoners will be released, but we are saying that if the separatist fighter tells you about unconditional release, now you, the government, you look at it. If it will be able to bring an end to the peace, or bring an end to the conflict rather, that we are going through, it means it's worth pushing through, because there's no taboo subject when it comes to conflict resolution on the table. If the separatist fighter says they want independence, and the government says no, independence is not good, we want centralization, all in all, is a matter to take it to the table. But the preliminary steps we are talking about, Babylon, if the separatist fighter tells you unconditional release, obviously the government has his own demands too, which probably you give to the separatist fighter, so that if you are going on unconditional release, and the separatist fighters too probably are agreeing to also engage in ceasefire as you want, and then I think we'll be doing Cameroonians a lot of good by stopping this bloodshed that we called it an uncalled for war.
General amnesty for all refugees, all Anglophones who are out of the country, so that they can come back home without any fear of military or police harassment. General amnesty, can it open the way forward?
It is very possible. If you look at the apartheid conflict in South Africa, what was the end result? Most of the police officers who were in charge of the killings, the shootings and the maimings of the blacks and the rapes, most of them were pardoned. You got the point. Now, in the case of the conflict in Cameroon, it becomes very clear that amnesty is one of the things, because when you want to engage into genuine dialogue, you must take the genuine dialogue till the end. Now, when you begin to put in place what we call a camouflage, or you put in place what we call a cosmetic measures, it explains why we are turning round and round at the same time. And I said, for the part of the government, if releasing people unconditionally, and of course, granting amnesty to people, that will pave the way for the peace process to be implanted, that is what we are engaging. Because where we are now, we are not getting any move, because, as I said earlier, the level in which the conflict is, the government is in charge of maintaining security, but at the same time cannot guarantee full neutralization of the boys in the bush. It is a worry. And so you could kill some, and when they kill even one soldier or two, it is a loss, because after everything, human life matters. Whether it is armed life, whether it is civilian life, or whether it is the life on the part of the soldiers. So all matters, and we must see to it that this peace process is put in place at all costs and not politicizing it as we see the government putting in place such moves.
Tayon Elvis, what do you think about the request for a time frame for negotiation? We are going to negotiate from the 1st to the 3rd, the 1st to the 2nd. Time frame for negotiation.
Now, you could put in place a calendar for negotiation or to settle a conflict, but you cannot be sure of that calendar, because when conflict begins, there are many things that go into play. For example, there are some exigencies that both parties involved in the conflict might not want to give in to their respective demands, and this will cause a prolongation of such conflicts in terms of timing. So at the end of it, Babila, time frame is necessary. We are even late already, that per se. But to tell you that when you begin a conflict, when you begin the conflict process, or the conflict resolution or the peace process, you could know how it will end, maybe by the end of July or by the end of September. It can never move because it is in stages, and that's how conflict resolutions move under normal conditions, ceteris paribus.
Now, the detainees also think with their leaders that these negotiations can only take place in the presence of a third party and on a neutral soil, out of the country. I think I've mentioned that several times here, that where we are, first, anybody who says the state can single-handedly solve this crisis will be deceiving his or herself. What am I saying? The demands they give are correct. Under conflict resolution, where there's a breach of trust between both parties, the next step is that a neutral party is required. And in the neutral party, it is not one party who imposes a mediator on the other. You get the point? It is a concerted effort. All right, where they disagree, both parties come in with their mediators. The AMBA brings his own proposed mediator, the government brings his own. And then on the other part, the venue of a mediation counts a lot under conflict resolution. Because you will not tell me that. That's why I said earlier that the issue called national dialogue that took place in Yaoundé was a fiasco. Why do I say so? Because seemingly people who were close to the party regime were brought in as sympathizers in the name of dialogue. In the case where an enabling environment is not put in place, Mr. Babila, to enable key actors in the conflict to be present, you are wasting your time. And that explains why a neutral ground is required. I am not saying that if somebody further tells you that let's go to South Africa, the state must go. No. All of these are done that is in connection with agreement by both parties. So if AMBA tells you that no, let's move to South Africa, and the state says no, I think we should go to Ghana, there should be a concerted effort where each of them are holding on their claims. Then another step is required, a neutral ground now, different from Ghana, different from South Africa. When all of these are put in place, such that the separatist leaders can now get the stakeholders. Remember, in the issue of South Sudan, when the conflict was being resolved, 26 rebel groups were involved. I am surprised that in Cameroon, some people think that only Siseko should be involved, or only Ayabacho, or only Chris Ano and Equinoxe. But no, in this conflict here, each person has an influence. So when the government chooses a neutral ground, chooses a mediator, which I have said, the government alone, from every indication, cannot single-handedly solve this problem. Once a mediator comes in this case now, a neutral ground accepted upon, I will tell you that the peace process has started. In that case, you cannot talk about ceasefire. You can talk about demilitarizing. In this case, even the AMBA fighters, their leaders will tell them that, okay, we have accepted on demilitarizing the area. While the government is taking its troops back to the barracks, please help us guide the civilians who are in your hands now. Because in any case in the agreement, where the military goes back to the barracks, and AMBA fighters, for example, keep on not doing their own, or maybe molesting the population, automatically the peace process will be broken. Some opinion leaders, Tayon Elvis, think that Cameroonians should solve their problems in Cameroon. We shouldn't continue to go looking for people out of Cameroon, out of the country, to come help us solve our problems, running back to the people who colonized us yesterday, running back to the same people who are still carrying out what some civil society leaders qualify as new colonialism.
Well, the main thing is that, as I said, bad faith has been exhibited during this conflict. And in the bad faith now, both parties do not believe in one another. As I said earlier, a third party is required. Now, I am a Pan-Africanist. What do I mean by that? If you tell me you are going back to meet France, you are going back to meet Britain, or any other colonial power in the African continent, I will not agree. But now, if you also tell me that let's go down to African Union, I will not also agree, because African Union is not independent. African Union is a toothless bulldog that takes finances from the European Union and other organizations that teleguide the activities. What do you do in this case? Both parties should agree and get a mediator, a credible mediator from Africa. Now, it could be former presidents like General Rawlings in Ghana. It could be the presidents of South Africa. It could be the president of Sierra Leone. Well, it could be president even of Nigeria. Now, if they get 2 or 3 or 4 of these presidents, be the current president or ex-presidents, who have what we call local standing and credibility, in this case, you can see the problem being resolved. But the main issue is that it cannot be solved by the state, because the state has proven beyond reasonable doubt that this crisis is above them to handle.
Elvis, let's talk about a problem raised by Human Rights Watch, which says in a report that soldiers are forcing civilians to fight against Boko Haram at the front line in the far north region of the country. Civilians who are not armed, not trained, and not paid by the soldiers. What do you think about this?
We call that an abuse of human rights on the part of the civilians and a suicide mission placed on the part of the civilians by the military. If the report of the human rights goes as per se, it means that the military needs to revisit its strategy, because the aspect of maintenance of peace and order rests on the soldier of security operatives on the ground and not on the part of the civilians. But the civilians on their own part have a role to play. That role is to supply what we call intelligence service and coordination efforts with the military. So in this case, if military tells you, because if you go to Israel, for example, you know that military training is compulsory, but you will not find them at a point in time where they are forcing the civilians, who even don't have idea of military training, to go and start fighting. They could do that when it has to do with extreme cases. But in the case of Cameroon here, what the military needs to do is that if you want to get civilians to be involved, you need to recruit them. You could recruit them as a vigilante group, and you give them adequate training, you equip them to the capacity that you people have, and then you can now send them on that mission. But when you take normal civilians who know nothing about guns and their security is at stake, and you tell them to face the dreaded Boko Haram, who come in different facets, we call that a suicide mission. And I think that something needs to be done. And I know that the officers in charge, if this report goes as per se, then it means that the government is supposed to address the situation as within the shortest possible time. Else, it will be putting the lives of fellow Cameroonians into jeopardy, which will not be a good idea to reckon with.
Tayo Elvis, journalist, political analyst, member of the Cameroon Renaissance Movement, CRM political party. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much. It's my pleasure. I will always be available if need be.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen, for staying with us. Goodbye. Have a nice weekend.